We are beginning Torah Tet Zayin today, Torah 16 in the Likutey Moharan, and this one is called Rabbi Yochanan Mishtae, Rabbi Yochanan related. Okay, and that's the beginning of the Torah. That's what the Torah is based on. It's based on a Gemara, a story, something that Rabbi Yochanan related, also in Masechet Baba Batra. And this Torah is fairly short. It's only like one page in the Likutey Moharan, less than a page, but there's a lot of tremendous deep understanding, tremendous fantastic ideas that are in this Torah that relate to Mashiach. They relate to the redemption. They relate to the Geula. And so let's begin. Rabbi Yochanan Mishtae, Torah Tet Zayin, Siman Tet Zayin. Rabbi Yochanan Mishtae, Rabbi Yochanan related. Ezim nacha dahaveka azlinan bisfinta v'chazena haikavra de'api gresha mimaya v'damya ene kitre siare. At one time, we were traveling with a ship, and we saw this fish which raised its head out of the water, above water. V'damya ene kitre siare, and its eyes, the eyes of the fish, resembled two moons. Okay? V'nafitz maya mitarte usya kitre mavre de sura. And out of its nose, out of its two nostrils, there was water that spouted out like two rivers of surah. Okay, so this is also a tremendously huge fish, right? If its eyes were as big as the moon, each eye was like the moon, and from its nostrils came out like two rivers of surah, so then this is a very big fish. But it's not just about how big the fish is, as we're going to see in this Torah. This is speaking about deep aspects, deep secrets, deep ideas that relate to Galut and Geula. And they relate to exile and the time of the Geula, the redemption and the deliverance. So the Rashbam explains V'nafitz, because it says that these rivers that were spouting out, this water that was spouting out of its nostrils like rivers. V'nafitz means v'shafach, it poured out. Usya, the nostrils. Nechirav, says the Rashbam, it's the nostrils, the holes in its nose. Mavre de surah, the rivers of surah. These are the rivers. What's surah? Surah is just the Aramaic way of calling Syria. These two rivers in Syria. So now Rabbi Nachman begins to explain this Torah and what it's relating, what it's speaking about, what it's representing. V'chazena haikavra, Rabbi Yochanan said, we saw this fish. What's the fish represent? Says Rabbi Nachman, shehu tzaddik hamechune b'shem dag. Kayadua, the tzaddik is called fish, as it is known. We've seen this in other Torahs in the Likutei Moharan, where Rabbi Nachman says that the tzaddik is considered the fish. The tzaddik is called the fish. The dag, there's actually Masorah, there's a tradition that by the Chassidim, they say that the souls of tzaddikim, people that are holy, that come back to this world in incarnations, many times they will come back in the fish. So fish are very, very spiritually elevated creatures. And that's also alluded to in the fact that halachically, we don't have to slaughter a fish in order for it to be kosher to eat. Just asifatan zohi taharatan, as the Gemara says. Just by gathering them out of the water, that's already preparing them. That's the proper kosher process of preparing them so that you can eat them. You can now eat them. And so fish have a very special place spiritually. And so the tzaddik is represented by the fish. The tzaddik is also the aspect of Shabbos. And Shabbos is the aspect, as we know, the famous Maharal, how he explains the 6 days of the week. The number 6 represents the 6 dimensions, the 6 sides of the physical dimension. right? You have the four sides that surround you, and the up and the down, those are the six sides of the physical dimension. And the inner dimension, that's the spiritual, the soul that gives life to all of these six sides, that's the Shabbat, and that's the number 7. And so the tzaddik is the Shabbat, and the Zohar refers to the tzaddik many times with the name Shabbat, especially in reference to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the greatest tzaddik, right? And so dag, fish is connected to Shabbat. The name for fish, dag, has a numerical value of 7. And we all eat fish on Shabbat for many reasons where the fish is connected to this aspect of Shabbat. So the tzaddik, which is the aspect of Shabbat, is alluded to as is represented by the fish here in this story, and in many places in many of the Agaditas. And it raised its head out of the water. Right? And it raised its head out of the water, above water, and its two eyes were like the moon. Each eye was like the moon. And the water was spouting out of its two nostrils like these two rivers of Syria. So says Rabbi Nachman, Ki efshar latzadik liot machshavto meshotet tamid bechokmot elionot, ki lifamim tzarich latzet chutz la'asok b'divrei ha'olam, כמו שאמרו חכמינו זיכרונם לברכה, פעמים ביטולה של תורה זוהי קיומה. So it says Rabbi Nachman, the tzaddik, it's impossible even for the tzaddik to be constantly in the highest states of dveikut, in the highest states of spiritual experience, where he is constantly surfing, so to speak, traveling through the higher worlds, from one world to the next world, in deeper and deeper and greater spiritual experiences of Hashem. Okay, that's a wonderful madriga, that's a wonderful level to have, but it's not possible to uphold and to keep that level at every moment, constantly. There are times where even the tzaddik needs to come back down and to function in this physical world and to kind of recharge the batteries and fill up the fuel so that he can ascend the next time greater and deeper. And Rabbi Nachman says this rule in a few places in the Likutei Moharan. There's a place where he even says this rule and he applies it to learning Torah. He says that the tzaddik cannot be 24/7 in learning Torah. There are times where, and here he also mentions this, bitula shel Torah zohi kiyuma. This is a rule that is brought in the Gemara in Masechet Menachot, Tzadik Tet Amud Aleph, 99, the first side, where the Gemara says that sometimes setting aside the Torah study is what helps you preserve it. Sometimes by closing the Sefer, closing your Gemara, and then going and dealing with the things of this world, that's the way you will be able to learn better the next time you open up the Sefer. And that's the way that you will be able to fulfill the Torah. The Torah is not just about the learning aspect, it's also about taking what you learned and then using it in your experience of the physical world to elevate the material of this physical dimension. And so that's why Hashem built into our physical experience in this world that we must stop at certain times to our learning in order to go and use and practice that light, that learning that we have acquired, that we have involved ourselves in practically. And so that's what Rabbi Nachman is saying here, that the tzaddik also cannot stay constantly in that great state of spiritual experiencing Hashem, or he is traveling from world to world in the higher dimensions. That also, that tzaddik needs to come down, rest a little bit, recharge his batteries, refuel, and then he'll be able to do it much greater, much deeper the next time. And so when Hainu kad mapik et atzmo mechochmot elyonot. So when it says here about the fish that is his head is now out of the water, that's the tzaddik that has now taken himself, removed himself from the divine consciousness, that expanded consciousness, that Torah knowledge that he was in, that surfing of the higher realm, the understanding and the experiencing of Hashem in greater and deeper ways. He took a break from that, and that's the fish that is now taking his head out of the water. Vedamya eine ketrei siare. So the water obviously represents the wisdom, the chokhmah of Hashem. It represents this higher spiritual experience that he was in. And at that point, his eyes, when he comes out of it, his eyes, each one of his eyes are like a moon. So what does that mean? So it says Rabbi Nachman, Vedamya eine ketrei siare kepekichat einai mechonim al shem hachokhmah, mosh katuv vatipakachna eine shnehem. וכשעוסק בחוכמתו, אזי אינה בבחינת שמש. וכשמסלק את עצמו מחוכמה עליונה, וזה כמו ביאת שמש. וכשבאה השמש, אזי נשתערים אינה בבחינת סיארי. כי סיארה אין מאירה אלא כאן נסתלק השמש. So says Rabbi Nachman that when the tzaddik is focusing his attention, experiencing deeper and greater states of divine consciousness and understanding Torah wisdom, which is Hashem's wisdom, which is the chokhmah, the wisdom of the divine, he's coming to deeper and greater levels of understanding in the Torah, in Hashem's wisdom. So at that point, his eyes are illuminated with the light of chokhmah. As we mentioned many times before, that the aspect of chokhmah is the aspect of light, and it's the aspect of the eyes. And here, his eyes, when he was in the water, meaning that when he was in that deep spiritual experience, understanding clearer and clearer the divine knowledge, the divine understanding, the divine consciousness, then his eyes were illuminated, lit up with the light of Chokhmah. And they were lit up like the sun, okay? Because that's the experience, the direct experience of that light of Chokhmah is compared to the sun. That's what Rabbi Nachman says. So, like we saw in the previous Torah, where Vatipakachna ene shenehem, that the eyes are they're an indication. When we mention the eyes, when we speak about the eyes, we're speaking about the aspect of Chokhmah. And when the eyes are illuminated, it's using that Chokhmah in the Chokhmah of Hashem, experiencing and understanding to a greater and greater degree, with greater and greater clarity, the Chokhmah of Hashem, the wisdom of Hashem, the knowledge of Hashem, the divine consciousness that is being experienced. And when that's experienced directly, and the tzaddik is just constantly going deeper and deeper and greater states of that understanding, of that knowledge, of that connection, then his eyes are compared to the sun. Okay, so there's a difference between the sun and the moon. The sun is where the source of light, where the light is shining from, the light is emanating from the sun. Okay, and so the experience of light that you have in the sun is a direct experience of light, where the sun is the source, the direct source, shining and radiating the light to you. Whereas the moon is an indirect experience. The moon is only a reflection of the light of the sun. Okay, and so the moon is an indirect experience of light. And that's the difference between Moshe and Yehoshua. The Torah tells us that Moshe kipnei chama, Yehoshua kipnei levana. Moshe is compared to the sun, and Yehoshua, who is the Talmud, the disciple of Moshe, who receives all of his Torah knowledge, all of his divine consciousness and holy wisdom, he receives it from Moshe. So what he is compared to the moon, that when you receive from Yehoshua, it's really you're receiving from the vessel that received from Moshe. So it's an indirect experience. So here too, when the tzaddik is in the water, when the fish is in the water, and the tzaddik is experiencing, going into deeper and deeper states of expanded consciousness of divine knowledge, of Torah wisdom, and understanding and connecting to Hashem in deeper and greater ways, at that point his eyes are illuminated and compared to the sun, because they are experiencing the light of Hashem in a direct way, where the tzaddik is just focused on going deeper and more and higher and experiencing Hashem in greater and greater ways. And so his eyes are like the sun, because that's a direct experience of Hashem's light. And that is reflected from his eyes. That is experienced, and you can see that in his eyes when he is in that state. Whereas Rabbi Nachman says, when the tzaddik has removed himself from that direct experience of the divine knowledge, of Hashem's wisdom, of Hashem's chachma, when he removed himself from that, when he descended from that experience, and that's represented in the story where when the fish has taken his head out of the water, at that point his eyes are no longer compared to the sun, because now they are experiencing Hashem indirectly. Okay, and they're now compared to the moon, because the moon doesn't shine its own light. It only shines what it received from the sun. So whatever was beforehand shined upon it from the sun to the moon, that's what the moon is giving off now. And so this is what that's what's happening with the tzaddik. The tzaddik experienced the light directly beforehand when the fish was in the water, and he was going into deeper and greater states of that divine consciousness, experiencing Hashem greater and greater, in greater and greater clarity. And now that he removed himself from that high connected state, and the fish has taken his head out of the water, now his eyes are like the moon, because what is shining from his eyes is only the reflection, is only what it received, what the tzaddik received beforehand when he was in that higher state. And so that's why this is what the story here that Rabbi Yochanan is relating is speaking about the state of the tzaddik when he removes himself from that deep connected chokhmah state that he was in. And that's why his eyes, the eyes of the fish, are now compared to the moon. Okay, the moon is only a reflection of what it received beforehand from the sun. לפעמים מאירות כשמש, כד אנחנו דבקים בחוכמה, ולפעמים מאירות כירח, כד מסלקים את עצמנו מלשוטט בחוכמה. And so Rabbi Nachman gives us this line that we say in the Nishmat prayer in Shachrit on Shabbat, and we say in that prayer, we say these words, we say, and our eyes are shining like the sun and like the moon. So Rabbi Nachman explains, what does this refer to? What does it mean that our eyes are shining like the sun? There must be a specific state that is called where our eyes are shining like the sun. That's a certain state that is described in that way. And then there must be another state that is described by saying that our eyes are shining like the moon. And so when we say that in the prayer, we're referring to different states. And so says Rabbi Nachman, there's a state where our eyes are shining like the sun. That's when we're experiencing divine consciousness, the Torah knowledge, experiencing Hashem directly in that high, deep state of connectedness to the Ribbon Shalom. That's called Chokhmah, where a person is completely surrendered to Hashem's light, and he is right now in a deep, meditative state of dveikut and connection and oneness with Hashem, where he is just every moment experiencing Hashem in greater and greater ways and more clarity. And so that's compared to the sun. And then there's a state where we're considered, where we are called that our eyes are like the moon, or shining like the moon. And that's when a person descends from that high state of Chokhmah. Okay? And so this is a rule that we see, spiritual rule, is a rule in understanding of that we see many times in the Likutey Moharan, where Rabbi Nachman refers to how in a great state of dveikut, in a state of bitul, where Rabbi Nachman calls bitul, when a person has surrendered the self and he has ascended to experience a deep connection with Hashem, a deep state of dveikut, of oneness with Ribbon Shalom, and experiencing the light, and he has become one with the light. And a person, Rabbi Nachman teaches us, instructs us to do what we can to experience that even once a day. That's called hitbodedut. Rabbi Nachman says that that's the purpose of hitbodedut. The purpose of our meditation is to come to this state. It's also something that we want to experience when we learn Torah. And Rabbi Nachman then speaks about how when we return from that state, okay, because it's impossible for a human being in this physical world, in this physical experience, to stay in that state constantly. And we must ascend to that state and then descend, okay? Like Zaka Aman de Ayil Venafik, the Zohar says. Praiseworthy is the one who knows how to enter and how to exit, how to ascend and descend. So when he descends from that state, when he returns from that state, Rabbi Nachman speaks about how there is a roshem, there is an after effect, there is a light that is left over within us, just like the moon. There's a reflection of what we had received before in the sun directly. Now we are compared to the moon, and that reflection informs us, influences our decisions and our reactions and the way that we live our life going through the physical world. And so that's what Rabbi Nachman is saying here, that we're sometimes compared to the sun. Our eyes are shining like the sun, and sometimes our eyes are like the moon. So when we are davuk, when we are one, bound to Hashem in the aspect of Chokhmah, complete surrender to the divine, experiencing Hashem's light directly, so to speak, right? Relatively, this is called directly, where a person is just going deeper and deeper and greater knowledge and greater Torah knowledge, greater and greater experiencing of Hashem, meditating on Hashem's light, meditating on Hashem's presence, feeling and experiencing more and more of Hashem's presence. And then there are times where we are compared to the moon, where our eyes are similar to the moon, and that's the state where we are now experiencing the reflection we have returned from that high, deep state of complete connected surrender to Hashem. And now we're returned from that and we're experiencing the reflection of that. And so that's the moon, that's a reflection of the sun. And there is water that is spouting out of the two nostrils of the fish, of the tzaddik. What is that referring to? Hem bechinat dren meshikin, shalehem ha'akum yidreshu v'imshechu et atzmam alehem, kmo shekatuv v'naharu elav kol hagoyim. So, says Rabbi Nachman, that these two rivers that are spouting out of the nostrils of the tzaddik are referring to the two Mashiachs. We know that there is the Mashiach that will redeem Am Yisrael deliver Am Yisrael from exile. There's the aspect of the Mashiach ben Yosef, the aspect of the Mashiach that comes from Yosef, and that's one power of Mashiach, one type of Mashiach soul. And then there's a Mashiach ben David, Mashiach that comes from David HaMelech, from Shevet Yehuda, that is an other aspect of light, of redemption, of deliverance, another type of soul of Mashiach. And we need both of these aspects, both of these souls of Mashiach. There are two types of Mashiach, and we need the combination of both of them in order to completely deliver Am Yisrael from the exile. And so that's what these two, the two nostrils are, the two Mashiachs, and the rivers that are flowing from the two nostrils represent all of the many nations. The 70 nations are going to be drawn to the two Mashiachs. They will seek them out, as it says in the pasuk in Yeshayahu, and all the nations will flow unto him. And when it says flow unto him, the word in the pasuk, flow unto him, they will flow to the Mashiachs, they will be drawn to the Mashiachs, they will seek them out. The pasuk uses the word v'naharu. Naharu is a word that also means a river. And the reason why, because are flowing to the Mashiachs They are seeking out the Mashiach. All of the nations will seek out this light of Mashiach when he will be revealed. They will all flow to him like a river. And that's why when the pasuk says that they will all flow to him, and uses the word that is similar, it's the same word as a river, v'naharu, because like a river they will flow to him. And so the two nostrils are the two Mashiachs. And we see many times Rabbi Nachman speaks about the connection between Mashiach and the nostril, the wind of the nostrils, the yishuv adat, the consciousness of that is connected to the nostrils, like Rabbi Nachman speaks about in Torah Bet. And so here too, these two nostrils are the two Mashiachs, and the rivers are all the nations that are being drawn to him, seeking him out. Tre naharot de sura ze bechinat akum Hashem avodah zara, כמו שכתוב, סרו מהר מן הדרך, והם נכללים בשתי אומות עשיו וישמעאל, ועל ידי אלו תריהן משיחין שהם תראוסיה בחינת רוח אפינו משיח השם, על ידם יגאלו וימשכו כנהרות אצלם ללמוד דבר השם. So these two rivers of Syria, now what is the Syria part of the story? What does that detail in the story represent? So he says that Syria represents the Gentiles, and it represents the idol worshippers. Okay, why is Syria, or the word surah? Why does the word surah, which is the word that the Gemara is using for Syria, that's the Aramaic version of the word Syria? Why is the word surah? Why does that represent idol worship? So Rabbi Nachman brings a pasuk in Shemot that says "Saru maher min haderech." It's referring to the Erev Rav. It's referring to how they left the way of Hashem very quickly. Very quickly they removed themselves and they strayed from the path of Hashem. And in that pasuk, it's referring to the idol worship that they did, that they served other gods and they strayed from serving Hashem. And so idol worship is referred to straying from Hashem. It's referred as the word visaru. Famous Baal Shem Tov insight. The pasuk in Kriyat Shema, we say Yisham meru lachem pen yiftei levavchem visartem. So we have the same word visartem, and you will stray from Hashem. The pasuk in Kriyat Shema is telling us we should be careful that our hearts should not be persuaded and turn away from Hashem. So it says the Baal Shem Tov says on that pasuk that as soon as a person, for a moment even, as soon as a person removes the heart from Hashem or loses the connection with Hashem, that's considered avodah zarah. That's considered idol worship. That's already considered. It's not only that you are not connected to Hashem, but that already brings a person to fall into connection to the other forces, the forces of darkness and the forces of concealment. And that's why it's important that even when a person descends from that high state of dveikut, he should stay somewhat connected to Hashem on some level of consciousness, or through your actions, or through your words, or your environment. But this word saru is a word that refers to straying from Hashem into idol worship. And so when we're speaking about the rivers of Syria, or the rivers of Surah, these are rivers of the 70 nations that are idol worshippers. That's what it's referring to. Like it says in the pasuk, "Saru maher min haderech," they strayed quickly from the path of Hashem, from the way of Hashem. That's speaking about idol worship. And they are included, says Rabbi Nachman, you take all the 70 nations who are all idol worshippers, right? They're not serving Hashem, they're not in the path of Hashem, they're not connected to Hashem. All of those 70 nations of idol worshippers are, they're made up of two categories. So all of the 70 nations can be put into one of these two categories, and they are the two heads, or the two main categories of all the 70 nations, and they are Esav and Yishmael. So you have half of the 70 nations are in the category of Esav, and half of the 70 nations are in the category of Yishmael. And that's why you have two rivers here. You have two rivers because these 70 nations of idol worshippers are either in the category of Esav idol worshippers or in the category of Yishmael idol worshippers. And through these two Mashiachs that we have, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, who are called, they're considered, they're represented by the two nostrils. How do we know that they're represented by the nostrils? So I said before that Rabbi Nachman brings this in many Torahs, but here too he brings us a pasuk from Eicha. The pasuk in Eicha says, Ruach Apenu Mashiach Hashem. The breath of our noses is the Mashiach of Hashem. Okay, and it's the literal understanding of that pasuk is that that's how precious and how important the Mashiach is. The Mashiach is the breath of our noses. Just like we need that for our life, that's the source of our life. Mashiach is the source of our life because exile is lack of life, and redemption, the deliverance, the Geula, is life itself. And so, Ruach Apenu Mashiach Hashem. But Rabbi Nachman says that there's a reason why. Pay attention to the words here. The Mashiach, says Rabbi Nachman, is represented by the breath of the nostrils. And Kabbalistically, this breath of the nostrils in the higher realm is representing a light, a tremendously elevated light, the light from one of the highest worlds. Rucha de Pardaske, the Fardashke that Rabbi Nachman speaks about in previous Torahs. So the nostrils are the two nostrils, or the two Mashiachs, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David, through these two Mashiachs, we will all be delivered from the exile, we will all be redeemed, and at the same time, all of these, the two categories of all of 70 nations of idol worshippers will all be drawn back to the word of Hashem, because these two Mashiachs will be revealed, and at the time that these two Mashiachs will be revealed. So that's the two rivers that are being drawn to the two nostrils. So it's interesting because it seems like in the story it's saying that the two rivers are rivers of water coming out of the nostrils, but here it sounds like the two rivers of the Syrians or the Surah, those idol worshippers, are being drawn to the nostrils. So that's something to contemplate what that means. But let's stop here for today's shir, and we'll finish this Torah Bezrat Hashem in the next shir.